Hello, my name's Chris Randall. Welcome to the Hofmann's Lowdown episode 2. Thank you for all your kind comments about the first episode. We've decided to do a second follow-up episode because you enjoyed it so much. In the first episode, some of you commented that you'd like to see some more specific information about some of the cars. So what we've got for you today is the latest car that's arrived here. It's one of the first in the UK. It's the Evora GT410, which is here. Starting at the front of the car, this one's got the facelifted bumper. This was first introduced on the GT430. This has got little hints of carbon and some cooling airflow to provide airflow to the charge cooling system. This particular car has got the cast alloy wheels on it. Forged alloy wheels are an option. Personally, I actually prefer the look of the cast alloy wheels, and they're quite a big cost saving over the forged rims. All the GT410s have got the two-piece discs on them. AP Racing calipers, although the key to the brake system in these cars is not so much the hardware on the corners, it's the Bosch ABS system, which Lotus have done an incredible job on calibrating. You really can brake these cars really deep, really late into the corners, wet or dry. It's an amazing system. The other thing that's a big improvement over early cars is the Michelin tyres. Previous Evoras, probably pre-400, had the Pirelli tyres, which were made out of camel toes in Istanbul. Horrible things. These Michelins are a massive step forwards. The car's much more sure-footed with these tyres on, and there's enough structure in the tyre wall to hold the tyre up properly. So you get much better, much more precise handling with the Michelin tyres. This particular car is one of the first GT410s into the country. It's going to be available to test drive here at Hofmann's in a few weeks' time, hopefully when the lockdown lifts. It's in terms of colour schemes, it's black leatherette inside, it's azure blue on the outside, which is the same colour as Ford used to use on the RS Cosworth and so forth. It's a lovely colour, it looks absolutely stunning. The car's got the leatherette coverings on the seats. This is a new option, only come out recently. I actually prefer this to the leather. It's not so shiny, it's going to be a bit harder wearing, stays cooler in the summer, and it looks really, really nice, especially with the grey. Some of the specific things that are improved on this version of the GT410 compared to the previous GT410 are the radio. The original Alpine unit was difficult to use and lacking in features. This one's nice. It's still not the height of infotainment, but it does have sensible things like Apple CarPlay, so you can plug your phone into it. On the very first Evoras and the Evora S, the ergonomics of the car were a bit challenging. Now, the dashboard layout looked nice and it had a lovely swoopy dash, but some of the things like the wing mirror button, which is now accessible, were tucked around the corner here and difficult to get to. The stereo was always a bugbear, and the leather above the top of the dashboard had a propensity to stretch and fail when it was left in the sunlight. This car's far better. The ergonomics inside are a much nicer place to be. Around to the back of the car, you can see that this car has inherited some really nice features of the GT430. It's got the apertures behind the rear wheels, which are carbon lined. They do actually provide a genuine aerodynamic benefit. They release some hot, high pressure air from the rear wheels. Coming up to the top here, the big difference between this car, the previous 410 and also the GT410 is it's got the standard rear tailgate. It's a heavier item, debatable whether it's prettier or not. I like the carbon tailgate of the 410, but the key thing is this has got the glass window, which does make the car much easier when you're reversing. The GT430 had the rear wing on the back, and I actually think the line's much nicer without the wing. We touched a little bit on the supercharged engine package on the previous video, but I wanted to talk to you about it a little bit more in depth here. This car is running the same 410 horsepower engine as you see in the Exige. Exactly the same engine package that you get in a 311, same as the GT430. The difference is only really being minor mapping changes. The key to this engine is the charge cooling circuit. You can see here it's got a couple of water pipes that run into a heat exchanger here. Just down here, I'll point to it, we'll get a close-up later, there's a water pump. So that carries water down the sill and takes it to a water-to-air heat exchanger at the front of the car. And this cools down the charge coming from the supercharger. There's another key difference that people don't talk about on these engines, and that is the placement of the intake air temperature sensor. And I'll explain, or try to explain, why that is very important. On the earlier supercharged cars, the non-charge cool cars, that sensor was placed before the intake to the supercharger, which meant that once the air has gone through the supercharger and heated up, the ECU doesn't have any visibility of that, so it can't compensate. And if it can't compensate, it can't adjust the map. So what used to happen on those engines, or still does happen on those engines, is the charge gets hot, the engine has detonation, the NOx sensors see the detonation, and then the engine responds to that by pulling timing out. And that causes quite a big drop in power. Now they changed that configuration for this car. It's got the temperature sensor after the supercharger, which means instead of making a big change in the ignition advance because of a knock event, it actually compensates before the knock happens. And that means that if things do get hot, if you do take it on the racetrack, you'll only see quite marginal reductions in the power of the engine. We've taken a couple of wheels off the car. I wanted to show you some of the oily bits and show you a few things that sets this car apart from the rest of the Lotus range. We'll go from the outside in. We've got a 380mm two-piece brake disc there, aluminium bells to keep it light. It's a big old disc on this car. That's going to stop it well. So coming into here, we've got a cast steel upright. That's nothing new. Lotus have been doing that for a while, and it's got a bolt-on hub. Lotus started using the bolt-on hubs, I guess, around the S2, and they're absolutely fantastic. We very, very rarely change a wheel bearing on one of these cars. They're very robust. Braided brake lines throughout, which is a nice thing. That means it doesn't need an upgrade. The wishbones on the Evora are all a cast aluminium item. Everyone familiar with the earlier cars, the Elises, will know that they're mostly fabricated from steel. This is a more robust part, more longevity to it, and it really goes to show how much more development went into this car versus the Elise and the Exige. Now moving in, it's got Bilstein dampers. Lotus have been working with Bilstein for many, many years. When they came to the 400, they raised the spring rate a little bit from the previous Exige S, and when they came to the 410, they raised it a little bit more again. It's still got lovely compliance to it. Now, the other difference with these cars versus the early cars is the front subframe. Now, the early cars, the chassis went all the way to the front, so if you had an accident and you ripped out one of the pickup points, the car was effectively toast. It was an insurance write-off. Whereas this car's got a separate subframe, which makes it much, much easier to fix in the event of the crash. There's probably a little bit of weight added to it, but it's worth it for the fact that you don't lose your prized possession if you have a little bump. Coming around to the back of the car, we've got more of the same. The brake disc slightly smaller at the back, as you'd expect. Still an aluminium bell. Now the nice thing with these is the handbrake is integrated inside the hub here, so you don't have to have a separate handbrake caliper, and you're not compromised on the sort of caliper you use for the sake of the handbrake. Now for that reason, we've got AP racing calipers at the back, 4 pots. We've still got the cast aluminium wishbones. Now the difference at the back really is the steel subframe. Aluminium at the front, steel at the rear. That's mostly because the steel copes with the heat better. Again, Bilstein dampers. If you come around here, you can see the vent to the back of the car. Unlike many cars that you see things like this are just cosmetic, that's actually a functional vent, and it's neatly integrated into the arch. Again, braided brake lines at the back. Lotus have always been pioneers when it comes to aerodynamics, and that's true of their road cars today. One thing that they do ever so well on all of their cars is underfloor aerodynamics. So just to run you through a few of the features of this car, Firstly, we've got a chin spoiler, which ships the air as it's coming through. Then we've got a completely flat floor. I mean, the whole thing is unimpeded. There's a little bit of cooling airflow here, but then we go straight into a diffuser. It really is, when you put a lot of cars on the ramps that pertain to have underbody aerodynamics and you actually look at them, they really don't. Whereas Lotus genuinely do. The nature of their construction, the flat aluminium panels, the bonded extrusions, they really lend themselves well to giving a real clean airflow from the front all the way through to the back of the car, and that reduces drag and increases negative lift, which is part of what makes these cars handle so well. That's it for episode 2. We'll try to shoot episode 3 shortly. We've got plenty of cars to choose from. I'm not sure which one we're going to do next, but no doubt it'll be exciting. Thanks for your time, and hope to see you after lockdown. Bye bye.